Hello, welcome back to the Tortoise Education Summit. My name is Liz Mosley and I'm going to be your host for the next session, which is all about what we should be teaching in our schools. And we've got a full 45 minutes, so that should be ample time for us to sort the curriculum out, I would imagine, with the help of our fabulous guest speakers who I'll introduce in just a second. This session is brought to us in partnership with Tes Develop, Whole School Online CPD, so thank you very much to them for their support. I hope you can all see and hear me okay. At the moment my Wi-Fi is holding up, so with a bit of luck, if the tech gods are smiling upon us, we'll get through to the end of the thinking without any hitches. My colleague Ella Hill is in the chat. You should be able to find at the bottom of your screen, or sometimes at the top if you're on a tablet or a phone, a way to either put your little digital hand up or type in your perspectives and ideas in the chat, and I'll do my best to bring in as many of you as I can. Make sure I've done all my housekeeping. Oh yes, and obviously this session is being recorded so that we can clip the best bits and share them with Tortoise members and what have you. If you do want to join in after the session's finished, continue the conversation in the Tortoise app, you can do that too. So this is a huge topic, and I actually edited a series of thinking sort of towards the back end of last year and the beginning of this year before lockdown started, which was called The Future of Education, in which this came up a lot. And we've invited 4 people along to sort of try and help us with different ways in to thinking about whether the content of the stuff we're teaching kids in schools is future-proof, is appropriate, and how we might think about repackaging some of that stuff for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And to kick us off, I'd like to start with Natasha Devon, MBE. Hi, Natasha.
Hello, how are you?
Hello, I'm really well. How are you? Nice to see you.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm melting, but I'm good.
Same. And do you know what? I've had to close all the doors and windows in my house because there's some really aggressive strimming and mowing going on outside. So I couldn't hear myself think. Natasha is one of the UK's leading voices on particular mental health in young people. And we've just come out of a session where we talked a lot about exams and examinations and the impact that has and fairness and so on. I wonder if we might start, Natasha, with some thoughts from you about the extent to which being okay in yourself is something that can be taught, or how educational establishments should think about well-being.
That is a absolutely huge question that you've started off with, and I always think one of my favorite quotes is from Jiddu Krishnamurti. He says it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And I think so often when we are teaching young people how to be resilient, which of course has been the watchword in education for about the past 5 years, what we're actually doing is teaching them to accept some of the sort of inequalities, injustices in their environment. And certainly at sort of early years and primary level, I think what we should actually be doing is looking at what creates a healthy and conducive environment for well-being and giving young people access to those things. Certainly we've seen since 2010 a really dramatic increase in anxiety in particular, but also in self-harm. And of course, the government have blamed this entirely on smartphones, but you also have to look at what's happened within the curriculum during that time. And I think reversing some of the cuts to the arts, to sport, to things that have a proven therapeutic value and making them core in the curriculum would be a really good start.
So in essence, Natasha, do you think that the connection between what is taught, we're not talking about having happiness lessons here, we're talking about understanding a different relationship between the content of the curriculum in maths and in history, and I'm going to come to Lavinia in a second, and ways of learning and ways of processing and what you're aiming for. It's a kind of whole package needs to be reframed in terms of well-being.
What I see so often in schools, and this is not a criticism of the schools, this has to do with time and resource restrictions, is you have this highly pressured term, which is broken up by a wellbeing week, where everybody gets a yoga lesson and to stroke a bunny, and then it's, well, you've got exams now, so back to work. And that is ineffectual. What we need to do is we need to have consideration of wellbeing and mental health running through the entire curriculum, like words through a stick of rock.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to come to Lavinia now, if I can. Lavinia Stennett, who is the founder of Black Curriculum, which is a very important and obviously recently more visible campaign to change the content, particularly of the history curriculum, but not only, to include Black history too in British schools. Because I'm later on this afternoon, I'm very excited and rather nervous to be interviewing George the poet for our keynote, and he talks about his studying of sociology, which is what he did at Cambridge, and how in learning sociology he was able to understand and the structures that were creating some of the tensions and anxieties and fears that were affecting him personally and his community, and the impact of that understanding on his own mental health, and that I understand it now, and it takes it out of me and my position and into something structural, and how that really allowed him to progress. I wonder if, Lavinia, you might be able to talk to us a bit about what Black Curriculum is and where you're at in your campaign and what it's doing, and perhaps a bit more about just why it matters, not only for the fact of it, but for the impact of it on young people's well-being.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. I think what is really key is that history is not just an abstract subject. It's really important that we're able to connect history to today. And through the Black Curriculum, we are a social enterprise that works to teach Black history and also support the teaching of Black history in schools by supporting teachers to understand how to bring the pedagogy and also the content. And as Natasha was saying, weaving it through every single class. So it's not just something that's relegated for Black History Month, or a topic that is just spoken of with the killings that happened over the last month of George Floyd. And I think what we're talking about is actually raising awareness through our education and empowering all young people in learning about British history more accurately. Currently, the Eurocentric curriculum does not have any Black histories at all. There's no reference or specific examples to Black history. And I think ultimately that is such a disservice to young people in terms of in the way it's structured, but also in the way in which it's taught. Often we hear examples of young people having to sit through classes of, reenacting slavery, going underneath tables, and just really odd and bizarre things that are expected of students in learning about one side of British history, but not the entirety of it. And I think what's really important is that we are aiming to understand the why. And as I said earlier, being able to connect the whys with today. How does the arrival of not only Windrush, but also the migrants from the Caribbean in the early 1910s influence the way in which we think about Black people being in Britain today? And I think, as you're pointing to, there is such an impact that it has on all students. Through our workshops with young people, we've seen that they've actually taken their experiences from outside of the classroom, and they feel very comfortable and free to actually have a place within the classroom to say that, do you know what, I agree, I disagree. This is something that I've experienced. And I think it's really important that we give young people the space to be honest, all young people, about the experiences that they've seen at home or on the street, and have that opportunity to really connect their identity with history. Obviously, this is not just a history thing. I think history is about music, it's also art, it's also in geography. And I think it's really key that we are focused on expanding narratives throughout the curriculum and not just in history, because ultimately, history is told in a number of ways. And I think with the current narratives that we have, it currently just censors or misconstrues the histories of Black people, positive and negative. And I think it's really important that we are honest in our teaching, and not just emphasizing the glorious or so-called glorious benefits of the British Empire.
Yeah. Lavinia, how is your campaign going?
So we started the campaign on the 1st of June, and that was called TBH 365, and it was aimed towards Gavin Williamson to get the national curriculum to embed specific parts of Black history into the national curriculum from Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 4. We mobilised over 70 MPs who were in full support of us. There are a number of high-profile celebrities who also backed the campaign, and the public have been amazing in terms of raising that awareness. On Tuesday, we received a response from Nick Gibb, basically saying that he's not going to meet with us, and he believes that the curriculum is currently flexible and it's broad and balanced, and that's why he's not looking to change the current curriculum at all, to think about how to embed Black histories. Through our work, we know that schools are less encouraged from a policy level to have Black histories. It's not going to be taught, and it's not going to be taught in a way where it's accurate or positive for young people. So I think it's really important that the government takes proactive steps at the moment to think about how we can engage to improve society at large, because this isn't about Black students, it's about everybody. Yeah.
And what now, given that disappointing reply from the
I think for us, the main thing is that we continue to support teachers, particularly through teacher training. I think that's so essential. And also continuing to provide more programs for young people outside of school, so they have the opportunity to release, their experiences in a way where they're heard and they're also valued. I think for us, those are the next steps, but we continue to apply pressure, of course.
Yes, absolutely. And Ella, I can't quite keep track of the chat, but if Ella could post a link to the Black Curriculum website so that people can, understand about the campaign and ways that they can get involved, I think that would be brilliant. That links into a question I wanted to put to Peter Hyman, who's co-director of Big Education, and before that founder and the first head teacher of School 21, which is a completely fascinating and very different kind of school. Hi, Peter.
Hi there.
Hello. Good. I can hear you too. And the reason I guess I wanted to sort of bounce from Natasha to Lavinia to yourself is because there's a through line in the philosophy of School 21 about well-being, about kind of self-determination, about the ownership of your own community and identity and all of that, and that you've sort of packaged in a really unusual way in the way that you approach the curriculum. Would you tell us a bit about what that looks like?
I mean, we talk about head, heart and hand, and we think that is a sort of framework that really ties into what Lavinia said and what Natasha said and what others believe out there. So, and it feeds back to the previous conversation about exams, or the previous session, which is we are just, as so many people have said, narrowly focused on one aspect of the head bit of head, heart and hand, basically cramming for exams, and we're neglecting, first of all, other bits of the head. So we're still, if we just start on the head, we're just cramming for exams, and we're not doing, for example, what's completely necessary these days, more interdisciplinary work. So we're doing a lot of siloed thinking. You go from your chunked up maths lesson to history to English, but you're not actually joining the dots in any way. And it's that we do a lot of work that is more than one subject coming together so that you can get that great understanding. And in the world that we are at the moment, it's those intersections, it's where subjects, disciplines rub up against each other that you get some of the best creativity. So that, we believe, ought to change. Then on the heart, which is about your growth and your well-being, we do a lot of work about people's identity. And if you're growing up, for example, in our part of East London, if you're a Muslim girl growing up in East London, you've got multiple identities, just to give one example. And to help young people wrestle with those identities and make sense of the knowledge that they've been given and what that means to them is really important. Another part of that is how you then interact with other people. So that's not just about basic tolerance, it's about seeing diverse lenses and diverse views as genuinely creative. And that's what the best organizations out there are seeing at the moment. They just don't want the same voices they've always heard. They want a diversity of opinion. So we think about that. And then the other element of the heart is as well as the knowledge passed on from previous generations. We do need to engage with Shakespeare, for example. We do want to engage with the things that are happening in the world around us. So climate change does matter. Thinking about race and gender does matter. Thinking about our mental health does matter. So that should be in the curriculum as well. And then the hand bit is about problem solving and creativity. So we go from head to heart to hand, and that is about the arts, which, as other people have said, has been neglected, but it's about problem solving. So I'm very proud, for example, that some of our students are setting up social enterprises whilst at school. There was an extraordinary one last year called Project Home, where sixth formers thought that the biggest issue facing them in Newham and the society in Newham was homelessness. And they started a Kickstarter campaign. They did a really high quality documentary. They brought different agencies together to campaign for change. And it was all run by students to make a difference in their community. And that's also the sort of things we should be doing at school. And underpinning, just a final point on that, underpinning all of this is speaking skills. So we've done a huge amount on what we call, it's sometimes got the clunky title of Orosi, but Orosi has become a thing now, which is to really develop people's voice. And so that idea that the classroom becomes, as the academics call it, dialogic, and that you learn not just through transmitting a teacher standing at the front, but genuine wrestling with ideas and dialogue, that is a really good way of learning and thinking and gaining confidence. So that's at the heart of our school.
Peter, forgive me for asking what is probably a really pedestrian question, but given the way you describe what goes on in School 21, slightly makes me want to come there. I don't know if, you know, but
no, you're very welcome. You're very welcome.
But how do you square that way of teaching and the content that you're talking about with kids passing their exams? And
no, but it's the question, because again, it goes back to the previous discussion. So that's why I'm such a big campaigner to change the exam system and the accountability measures, because there must be a better way of judging the worth of a young person at 16 or 18 than just the narrow recall of information in an exam. If you think about the talents of young people, if you think about the skills, if you think about what we value in life. I mean, COVID has brought home to so many people, particularly parents. I mean, I've got teenagers at home who are homeschooling or seeing what they're doing at home. We don't, as parents, just want another worksheet from the school. We actually realise that for a young person to flourish, we do need to attend to their well-being. We do need them to do exercise, create things, problem solve. And we're probably most proud as a parent, not when they filled in that worksheet, but when they've decided, oh, I'm going to try my hand at cooking for the first time. Or many people up and down the country are doing dance routines on TikTok. Now, maybe of varying quality, but there's a lot of creativity going on at the moment, which we ought to value, and we do value, I think, as much as the narrow academic.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to come in a second I'd like to speak to Harvey and to Himanshu, if I can, who've been making comments in the chat that I'm interested to sort of pull out some threads from. But before that, if I can come to Sue, please. Sue Wijeratne, have I said your surname more or less correctly? I hope so. Good morning, Sue. Sue
Morning.
is a lower master at Eton, one of, if not the most famous school in the world, potentially, certainly in the country. Because of the institution you represent, Sue, and I confess I have some pre-existing prejudices about what it's like at Eton. Some of your old boys aren't doing a magnificent PR job of your fine institution. But I'd love to know, for somebody who knows very little about Eton, and sort of imagine somewhere between Tom Brown's Schoolboys and Harry Potter, how do you configure the curriculum? How much does it change? Where does somewhere like Eton, that to the untrained eye is a very traditional white British, bastion of old school, literally, what's the role of something like that in some of these issues?
Yeah, you must come and visit so that we can blow those misconceptions out of the water, I think. Yeah, I mean, it's really, really important for us to make sure that everything that we're doing is that we're nimble, that we're flexible in the way that we develop our curriculum. I think certainly here, we really, really believe in that sort of holistic education. So So it's about, if you like, combining a grounding in the traditional disciplines with the education in life skills. And we need to, we always need to be looking and learning more and adapting to respond to what's going on out there. I mean, I'm a geographer. Some people think that's a very traditional subject, but actually it's an enormously dynamic subject. And, particularly in today's world, where we need people to understand change and the next generation understand what to do about the change in global warming, in sustainable food production, in migration patterns, the spread of disease, all those things. Even within the curriculum, you need to be adaptable into changing things. But equally, we're constantly looking about how to embed the life skills into our curriculum, and to ensure the well-being of the students, and and that we have a curriculum that is reflective of today's society. So, we're looking at opportunities to build resilience, creativity, character and moral values, and that whole community responsibility and social awareness is really, really core to what we do at Eton as well.
Do you feel that Eton has a symbolic role in this sort of national debate, and particularly now in this moment, not just because of what's happening, for example, with Black Lives Matter, and we're talking a lot more about access and fairness, but also because of the government that we have and some of those things I touched on about PR? How do you engage, as somebody who is there to run a school and to educate kids, how do you manage that sort of political or symbolic role of Eton? It looms large in our sort of national imagination, doesn't it, Eton?
Yeah, it does, and I think we have a real duty to do the right thing as well. As you say, there are people who haven't done us favours in the past, and our image, people do have a certain image about us. And that's why you may have picked up a few weeks ago, we announced that we're, over the next 5 years, putting £100 million into tackling educational inequality within the country. And we're doing that because it's the right thing to do. It's not just to make a statement about Eton, it's the right thing to do, and we have the resources and the connections to be able to do that. So it is important that we lead the way, but it's also important, I think, that we're trying to navigate our way through those misconceptions as well. Because I think, if you saw the partnership work we do, and if as the minute we closed as a school, we set up as a hub for local primary schools of children of key workers and vulnerable children. We opened 4 of our boarding houses to key workers. So there is this softer side of Eton that people don't always see, but it is really, really important for us to lead our way there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sue. I'm going to come to some people who've been making some brilliant comments in the chat. If perhaps I could start with Himanshu, because I think your video is ready to go, and I'm struck by your comment about teaching civility at primary level. Are you there, Himanshu? Hi.
Yes, I am. Hi there.
Hello.
Hi. First of all, I wasn't expecting to be put on the spot, so hello everyone. Just to give you some context, I'm a relative newcomer to education. I mean, I'm teaching at a school in South London, and I teach science. And I've got into education after 30 years in the corporate sector. And one of my drivers to get into education was just to try and help a lot of youngsters who I've been involved in recruiting over the 30 years I was in the sort of corporate sector, learn some basic tenets on which society is founded. Just recognizing that other people also have an equal right to exist and their opinion matters. And that's something which was unfortunately missing, and this was missing from people who had some of the fanciest qualifications. And hence my comment about being civil to each other.
Yeah. It's interesting. Sometimes I have 2 primary school age children, and I'm not sure that they or their peers are always too big on civility, but I absolutely understand what you're saying, Himanshu. I'm going to go now, please, to Charlie. Charlie Clement, who is bringing up the question of, are you there, Charlie?
Hello.
Hi, Charlie. You can make your point much better than I can.
I think I've been talking a little bit about kind of disability awareness and mental health, particularly. As a disabled student, I went through school and, you know, my peers didn't understand kind of what I was going through, and there was a lot of, you know, slurs and insults and stuff. And I think it's really important that our young people kind of learn more about the differences that we might experience as people. And I think, again, going back to the sort of Black history point is massively important as well. I started reading a book last week, and I'd learned more in 15 pages than I've learned in my 15 years of education. And I just think that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, I went to a state school, and they were lovely and they were brilliant compared to a lot of state schools, but I still didn't learn next to nothing about topics that I think are really, really important.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And you're obviously, you know, close to your educational school experience, you know, lots of us are sort of further away from it, so to see it so clearly. I'm going to go to Harvey. I know she can't put her video on, but she was brilliant contribution to a thinking we had on Monday evening, which was about taking responsibility for our past. And she's a historian, I believe, and has shared an amazing reading list of all kinds of interesting, reliable historical sources of history that it sits outside the sort of standard white British view of history. Harvey, are you there? I know we can't see you, but if we can hear you, it'd be brilliant to hear.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Hi, Harvey. Nice to hear you again.
Nice to see you and hear you, of course. So yeah, I definitely think we need to include more globalized and diverse histories. I kind of chatted to you and others on the thinking earlier this week on the future of history. And I think there really needs to be greater inclusion, going back to what Lavinia said with the Black curriculum, kind of greater awareness of what different histories there are. I mean, kind of about me, I just finished my own liberal arts degree. So kind of this theme of education is really current for me because I've had the opportunity to study so many different topics, kind of looking at history in particular. My dissertation focused on the need to include South Asians in British historical education. And I shared with yourself a report by the Royal Historical Society from 2018, and that really kind of had an in-depth look on, you know, the underrepresentation of people of colour, BAME people in not only in the historical curriculum in secondary education and higher education, but also the lack of representation in teaching, in different areas of education, which I feel needs to really be touched upon as well. And also supporting this teaching, you know, the need for more awareness and training, because as we said, like, we have established teaching practices, but in order to fully reflect, you know, a more modern history, it might be the need to, you know, expose and make people more aware of what has been going on and what has been brought to light in the past 30 years or so. It's definitely in terms of, you know, connections between South Asians in Britain and with the Black curriculum, etc.
Yeah, thank you so much, Abby, and it's no problem at all. Your camera isn't on, and there are people in the chat asking for the resources that Abby took the time very kindly to send over, and I've asked my colleague Cordia, who is in the app, in the chat, to post it in the library section of the Education Summit. So if you want to dive into it, there'll be some brilliant stuff there, and my thanks to Abby for taking the time to do that. I'm going to come in a second to Leslie Ann and hopefully to Alison, who are raising, I think, important things to pick up in the chat. But while they just come in and we make sure we can hear them, if I can come back briefly to Peter. Peter, in another life, I have been doing a master's in sociocultural linguistics at Goldsmiths, which I have failed to complete, so I'm not a good example, although it was amazing. And I'm really interested in your Orosi stuff, because in linguistics, there's a lot of talk about the resistance of prescriptive you know, the sort of it's popular in modern linguistics to say you mustn't teach people that there's a better or a worse way of saying things, because it dislocates them from their natural way of expressing themselves. And I just wonder how that all maps with teaching Orosi. I get the idea of teaching confidence and expression and critical thought and being able to influence, but how do you square that with a sort of sense that there's a right and a wrong way of speaking?
Yeah, so it's not about elocution, and it's not about sort of picking up on dialect or anything like that. What it is, we had a really good project with Cambridge University, and we broke Orosi down into 4 strands: physical, cognitive, linguistic, and social emotional. And then if they're clever ways of starting to assess students, and it also applies to adults as well, so that we know if you, and often politicians are accused of this, that they may have a great charisma and be able to hold an audience, which is the physical strand. But when you actually go away from what they're saying, the cognitive strand, for example, you think, well, what actually did that add up to? Was there a real argument there? So again, what you're developing in young people is those different strands. Cognitively, can you make a cogent argument? Can you pick holes in someone else's argument? Linguistically, are you stretching for really interesting language and idiom when you speak, rather than, you know, saying like every third word, or just sort of being lazy, as we all are quite a lot of the time, in the language we're using? If we were writing, we would craft the way we write, but we don't tend to with speaking. Then social emotional is also training people to listen. We sometimes just say, oh, you need to listen more, but there are actually some real techniques to how we listen. There are different interesting ways of really picking up on what someone's saying and looking for the cues and all the rest of it. So it's a skill set. And then when it's applied to the classroom, it's about that bringing those 4 strands together and wrestling with the content of what people are doing. But it also, I mean, we found at our school that there are fewer fights in the playground, to give an example, because actually, if you know how to engage in dialogue and talk your way out of a problem, you don't have to resort to hitting someone. So there's lots of spin-offs in terms of giving someone the confidence. And the final point I'd make is, I've always seen it as metaphorical as well as sort of literal. So Orosi is about finding your voice, and finding your voice is finding out who you are, finding out your identity, getting the confidence to say what you believe. So it's that element, as well as the craft of speaking with more skill. So it's very powerful.
Thank you very
and
much.
it makes students very reflective. So this idea of metacognition, if they're used to talking, they're also used to, and we really sort of introduce this at an early age, they're also used to reflecting their learning and being able to think about how they're growing as an individual. So it's very powerful in that way as well.
Thank you. Fascinating. It's a good segue actually into Leslie Ann Godwood, who's been making comments in the chat about teaching critical thinking, really. Leslie Ann, are you there?
I think so. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you. Hello.
Oh, thank God. I haven't conferenced since the old days when the NUT used to put on conferences that were very cheap, and they'd send me on them when I was a teacher trainee. So I apologise. There's loads of sort of things. What did you want to particularly ask me? Because I'm coming from a home ed angle, so that's a fresh one. I am actually a trained teacher, but I home educate my 9-year-old and have done from the word go, somewhat against my will, if I'm honest.
So I was wondering if about the comments in particular that seem to sort of catch the imagination of a few other people watching, where you say, isn't the point we have to stop telling young people what to do, but how to think, which combines very much with what Peter's saying.
Absolutely. Actually, this is a huge thing I'm noticing, because of having been in a secondary environment for teaching, and then taking a few years out, and then having my daughter, and then out of the blue deciding, well, not really out of the blue, but things gradually getting to the point where we just couldn't put her into school. I walked into an environment of a huge age range of 4-year-olds through to 16-year-olds. And my area of expertise having been the 11 to 16 or the 11 to 18, I was suddenly hit by how different these teenage children in the home ed community are. They're divergent thinkers, and not even naturally because they're capable of divergent thinking more than any other child, but because without being stuck in the confines of a classroom and classroom engaged thinking, they have spent a lot of time not on their own in their own minds, but not being funneled in certain directions. And they're just such interesting people. And the younger ones, who I will freely confess, I couldn't stand my primary teaching training area. You have to do it as part of your PGCE. It was torturous because primary is so not my field, but the children of primary age are so much more engaging. And I think a lot of it's to do with the fact that they're not being asked to regurgitate facts. It's a running joke in my family that if you ask my daughter what she's learned, she's not going to tell you, because as far as she's concerned, if you don't already know it, there's something wrong with you. So she doesn't want to tell you what she's learned. She wants to tell you what she thinks. And I think that's a huge theme that's sort of coming out to me, is that our children, if we're going to raise them into the next generation to not just know about climate change or know about structural discrimination, but actually to address it, we've got to stop telling them what to think. We've got to stop treating history as something to be disseminated and it's the story of us, and identity as rigid. We have to talk about it as a totally organic process. And the pride that we take in being British, being female, being of various diverse backgrounds, all of those sorts of things. The pride that we take in who we are is about the fact that we are allowed to be who we are, that we're allowed to stretch the limits of thinking, that we can do something as incredible as change streams so fast that we can slow down the spread of a pandemic, but continue through the internet to discuss it, to think in a more global way. That's incredible. And to harness that, you've got to free human beings from thinking that their value lies in examination, in performance. And I speak as someone who used to perform very well in exams, but actually that's just really irrelevant in a world where you have to actually try and fix problems that came about before you were born. The only way to do that is to change the narrative and to empower yourself by... Sorry, I'm probably going on a bit.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I'm conscious of time, Leslie, but thank you very much for your. It's valuable and it's important. I'm pleased we had time to come to you. I'd like to go to Alison, and then perhaps after that, I might actually go to my colleague Abiola, because there's a really interesting run of chat between Abiola, Aisha, Harvey, talking about all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to plump for Abiola and see if she can kind of play that back in as we sort of get into the home straight. So Alison, are you there? Because I'm really interested in your you've referred to yourself as a dinosaur, which I refute absolutely, but I'm really interested in this sense of the curriculum wasn't always this way, so it's not about starting from the beginning but kind of getting back to where it was. Just unpack that a bit for us. You're a teacher.
Yeah, I was a teacher. And I've always been a teacher, but in diverse ways. So I started as a secondary teacher in the 70s. It was extraordinarily exciting. There were all these new technologies around, new ways of using them, lots of money coming into the education system, new ideas, cooperation was like mad in the wonderful school I taught in. And out of all that, and out of the first movements towards global education as well, that started, in all these environmental issues we talk about now, they were alive and kicking back then. And there was so many great models around of the kinds of things that both Peter and Leslie are talking about. And I think what we have here is at the moment is that, as usual, politics is trumping good education. You've got politicians in power who believe ideologically that a certain kind of education, facts-based education, at least that's what Michael Gove has always believed in, is the way forward. Without facts, you can't think. Well, we've heard lots of examples of how that doesn't go. They have to go hand in hand. We've got to get away from politicians controlling our education system. It's so important. How we do that, I don't know, but I have to say the previous Labour governments were going some way towards that in some of the things they did. And just to say, finally, I ended up doing outreach education, mostly heritage-based, up here in Newcastle. And I had designed a whole new wonderful set of outreach activities for kids, primary kids primarily. I agree with Leslie, they are fantastic. Great thinkers, and it was based on the new curriculum, which was based on creativity. The new government coming in, it went under the table. We've got to get away from this vacillating and back to some of the wonderful things that were said in a previous tortoise thinking this morning about the things that make good education, and they're about creativity and cooperation and thinking that everyone can do the best.
Thank you very much, Alison. I'm going to go to Abiola, as I said, and then I know that Natasha wants to come back in, and we're into the last 6 minutes. So Abiola, are you there?
I am.
Hi,
can you hear me?
nice. Yeah, I can hear you. Nice to hear you. Just, I was really interested in the sort of back and forth between yourself and Avani and Aisha in the chat. Just play back what you guys were chatting about.
I think we were just kind of talking about the like the diversity of how people got here. I use that phrase like quite like loosely, because then it goes back to what was said earlier about being able to express yourself also comes from a strong sense of identity. And if you don't know that identity, or if you know that identity at home and then you go to school and you're being taught something different, or you look in the media and you're being taught something different, there's a conflict there. So I think what we were just having in the conversation was just sharing the experiences of, I'm Nigerian, my parents came here as a qualified architect and qualified lawyer, practiced here, just kind of, it was sort of advertised to Nigerians specifically because of the relationship with Nigeria and the British Empire as sort of like the jewel of Africa, all that sort of narrative. They came literally, it was advertised like, not like, like pretty much like an Erasmus year, like come here, get a bit of international experience and decide what you want to do after, as opposed to, you know, coming here to stay forever. They just happened to meet each other, they happened to stay. And I have friends who are from Nigeria who grew up and lived there, whose grandparents were given passports. And when they were returning back to Nigeria, they literally were like, we're done with this, we don't need this, and we're going to continue to do what we were doing when we were practicing back at home in Lagos. We're going to go back and we're going to do it. People, I know lots of people who have been encouraged to come here, sponsored to attend Oxbridge. Historically, there are a lot of Nigerians who've done that, who have been strategically put in positions, basically, to advance their contribution, I guess, to the ties that specifically, I guess, Nigeria has with the empire. But having gone to like a school where there are a high majority of Asians as well, I understand the context of how, for example, Asians moved to East Africa, Uganda, Kenya, etc., through encouragement from the relationships again with the empire. So I think being able to actually openly have these discussions and I guess educate each other as we're doing in the comments starts to expand the narrative, because I think there's almost like a one-track perception of what is the Black experience, what is the Asian experience, why are people here, what are people's motives, what do they expect to be extracting from this glorious British land? And actually it's a lot more complex than that, and actually it's a two-way thing and it's symbiotic. So I think it's important for people to be aware of that, and that's why I guess things like the Black curriculum and other organizations are important, because there's not this perception of then, you know, people are coming here and leeching and then they're complaining they don't want to be here. It's actually a lot more nuanced and complex than that, and it goes back decades.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks ever so much, Abiola. I'm going to come back to Natasha because I know she's been sort of desperately wanting to sort of weigh back in on a couple of things, and she's sat there patiently from the very beginning. Are you there, Natasha?
Hi, yes, I am here.
Sorry to keep you waiting.
No, it's fine. It's been really fascinating listening to everybody's contributions. And I just wanted to point out that there is a common thread that runs through all of this, what Lavinia said, what Abiola just said, what Charlie said, because when you look at mental health statistics for young people, the groups of people that are more vulnerable to issues are Black, Asian, mixed race and other minorities, particularly if they're first generation immigrants, LGBTQ young people, and people with a disability. And what unites all of those people is they're far less likely to have that sense of belonging, which we know is really crucial for mental health. And certainly something that would aid that sense of belonging is, for example, with the Black curriculum, understanding that Black people have been living and contributing to British society since the Roman Empire, seeing LGBTQ people not just in the context of their sexual proclivities, but as three-dimensional rounded people contributing to society, understanding that disabled people aren't just victims, that they are making meaningful contributions as well. And I think if we do that, then we foster that sense of belonging and improve the mental health of those demographics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you about that through line. And it's a sort of mirror of, there's a sort of intersectionality thing about identities and communities, and then there's this interdisciplinarity thing about how the stuff comes together in, you know, practical stuff like lesson plans and the space design and all of that stuff that goes into having a good educational experience. With 1 minute to go, I don't think we've got time to bring in anybody else, which I'm so sorry about, because there's a ton of stuff in the chat that is really, really valuable and important, and that would move this on. Some things that I can just play back a little bit from the notes that I've made that I think are important for us as lodestones, but I will save the chat and we can go over it with a fine tooth comb to sort of pick out some of these threads. Firstly, this idea that in accepting, in sort of resilience and preparedness for the world is a sort of a euphemism for just accept that it's going to be really difficult and unequal and unfair, I think is a really interesting start point for this as a reason for change. There was comments in the chat and we touched on it a little bit in our conversation but didn't fulsomely get there, which is that it's tempting to put in sort of emblematic ameliorative tactics to sort of address some of these things, you know, health and well-being week, or to Natasha's example, come and stroke a bunny and now go and do your A-levels kind of thing. And the difficulty with that sort of annexing of a treatment is you're acknowledging the problem, but you're not really prepared to throw everything up in the air and repackage it again. And if anything, you could run the risk of making it worse. I was completely fascinated to hear from Peter about head, heart and hand, about the sort of fusion of the arts and problem solving in a hand world, a sort of doing world, and the intersectionality of subjects and trying to find a way to sort of smash together history, geography and art, or whatever it might look like, I think is fascinating. I can't begin to think of how you started to do that, you know, to sort of get, you know, real messy, noisy, late probably kids to sort of learn in that way, but I'm fascinated and I'd love to come and look round. I was also particularly struck by what Alison said towards the end of the conversation about at one point in the 70s, creativity and collaboration felt like they were central to what the education system wanted itself to be like, and somehow that's dissipated, perhaps politically, which takes me to my sort of last and final and sort of lasting point, which is the political blocker which Lavinia has crashed up against with her campaign around the Black curriculum, which it feels to me to be a barrier, that there's something in the political system and the political control of education decision making that is different and distinct from what students want, probably parents, and in the combination of those two things, communities, if you like, and educators as well. It just sort of feels like there's a disconnection there's a disconnect there rather. This feels like it was not quite long enough to fix the problems of the curriculum, as I suggested possibly might be the case at the beginning, but it's been completely fascinating and very stimulating. So thank you so much to Lavinia, to Sue, to Peter and to Natasha for their contributions, and obviously, of course, to our partners who've made this possible. The next thinking starts at 12 o'clock, so have a little potter around, have an ice lolly, douse yourself in cold water to keep going, and thank you so much for everybody in the chat. If you want to continue, then head to the app if you're a Tortoise member. If you're not a Tortoise member, you can become one for free. Ella's posted the link, and I hope you're enjoying it. Thank you very much for being here. Goodbye.